We often hear about the immediate seismic devastation of natural disasters, the collapsed buildings, the chaos. But what about the silent toll it takes on the unsung heroes who rush into that very chaos, the search and rescue workers? Today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that, the hidden respiratory health risks faced by those responding to severe earthquakes. And our mission today really is to dig into this study, a recent one focused on the catastrophic 2023 Kahramanmaraş earthquakes in Turkey. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insights about the respiratory health of the volunteers and personnel involved. First, just try to picture the scene. The sheer scale of destruction from the 2023 Kahramanmaraş earthquakes, it's almost unimaginable. We're talking two colossal quakes, a 7.8 and a 7.5 magnitude, hitting on February 6, 2023. The numbers are just staggering. Over 50,000 lives lost in Turkey, over 8,000 in Syria, more than 122,000 injured. And it wasn't just those two main shocks. There were over 45,000 aftershocks, just relentless. And right into that maelstrom, you have these rescue workers stepping into, well, a silent, pervasive danger.
Exactly. And when you look at these disaster zones, the environment itself is none. It's a major challenge for responders. We're talking prolonged exposure to what the study calls mixed and high levels of dust. And it's not just dust, it's a whole cocktail of airborne irritants. We've seen this before, actually. Previous research, like studies on firefighters after the Taiwan earthquake or responders after hurricanes, they consistently show similar respiratory issues. And the data always points back to how critical respiratory protection is.
Okay, so let's unpack this specific study then. Looking at the immediate health impacts on the workers in Turkey, what were the most common symptoms they reported?
Well, the big ones, the most commonly reported among those working right in the earthquake zone, were things like nasal discharge and throat irritation. That was about 35.5%. Coughing was also very common, around 28.2%. And nearly 20% reported sputum production, basically coughing up phlegm. Then you had sneezing at 16.4% and eye irritation or stinging at almost 13%. Overall, nearly a quarter, about 23% of participants reported some kind of health issue. And the most frequent diagnosis, upper respiratory tract infections at 11.5%.
And it wasn't just general illness, right? The study found differences based on what people were actually doing.
That's a key finding, yes. Nasal discharge 43.9% in the search and rescue group versus 26% in others, and eye irritation 18.3% versus 6.5% were significantly higher for the search and rescue teams.
Wow. So that really highlights the direct impact of crawling through rubble, breathing that concentrated dust.
Absolutely. It shows a direct link between their specific tasks and these acute symptoms.
What strikes you most about those immediate numbers? For me, it's just the sheer prevalence, how widespread it was right away. It feels like a real warning signal.
I agree. It underscores how quickly and broadly that immediate environment impacts health. It's like the body's first acute response, even before we get to potential deeper lung issues. It's definitely a warning shot.
A critical warning shot indeed. Okay, so moving beyond what people felt or reported, the study also used objective measurements, right, to look deeper into lung health.
Exactly. They didn't just rely on symptoms, they used standardized tests, things like spirometry and also carbon monoxide diffusion capacity, which is often called DLCO.
Can you briefly explain what those tests tell us?
Sure. So spirometry basically measures how much air you can breathe out and how quickly. It helps detect things like airway obstruction. DLCO is particularly interesting here. It measures how efficiently oxygen moves from the tiny air sacs in your lungs into your bloodstream. It's a really good indicator of how well the lungs are doing their fundamental job of gas transfer.
And problems with DLCO could suggest damage deeper in the lungs.
Precisely. Damage to the delicate lung tissue itself. And what's fascinating often is how these objective tests can reveal issues that people might not even be fully aware of symptomatically yet.
So what did these objective tests show when they compared the groups, the search and rescue folks versus others?
Well, the picture became even clearer. For the search and rescue workers, key spirometry measures like the FEV1-FVC ratio, that's a common indicator for obstruction, and the maximum mid-flow rate, or MMFR, which reflects the health of smaller airways, were significantly lower compared to people involved in other activities like logistics or security.
So it's affecting airflow, potentially in the smaller airways.
It appears so. And interestingly, even the support group, not direct search and rescue, but still helping nearby, showed significantly lower absolute FEV1 compared to the other group. And, maybe unsurprisingly, smoking also played a role. Smokers had significantly lower DLCO values, both absolute and the percentage predicted for their age and height, compared to non-smokers.
Okay, here's something I found really interesting. The study looked at timing. Did it matter when people arrived or how long they stayed?
Yes, and this is where you really start to see the impact of exposure duration and intensity. They found that participants who arrived within the first 7 days, right into the thick of it, when dust levels were likely highest, had significantly lower average absolute DLCO values compared to those who arrived later, between days 8 and 13.
So early arrival meant a bigger hit to that gas transfer capacity.
It seems so. And interestingly, even those who arrived quite late after day 14 showed significantly lower percentage predicted FVC, which relates more to overall lung volume. So different timings might affect different aspects of lung function, but the impact is there.
And the follow-up, this is maybe the most concerning part. They retested people months later, right, after they'd left the disaster zone.
Yes, at least 3 months after they returned. And this is critical. They found that the second round of DLCO measurements, both the absolute values and the percentage predicted, were significantly lower than the initial measurements taken closer to the exposure.
Lower, even after months away from the dust.
Lower, significantly lower.
Wow. So this isn't just a temporary irritation. It suggests a lasting, maybe even worsening impact on the lungs.
That's exactly what it suggests, a persistent, long-term effect. The damage isn't just resolving on its own once the exposure stops. It seems to linger, or perhaps the full extent of it takes time to manifest in these tests.
Why is that DLCO decline so significant? What's it telling us is physically happening inside the lungs after breathing in all that dust for days or weeks?
Well, a reduction in DLCO is a really important marker. Clinically, it can indicate that dust is accumulating deep in the lungs, interfering with gas exchange. It's actually shown a strong correlation with serious occupational lung diseases like pneumoconiosis, which you see in minors, or asbestosis. Think about how the lungs clear themselves. The upper airways, the tracheobronchial tree, they have cilia and coughing to clear dust relatively quickly. But clearance from the deep lung, the alveoli where gas exchange happens, that's a much, much slower process.
That's slow, are we talking?
It really depends on the type of particle, its size, its chemistry. But studies have shown half-lives for particle clearance, meaning the time it takes for half the particles to be cleared ranging from, say, 30-odd days for some things up to 600 days for others. Specific studies mention ranges like 330 to 420 days.
So potentially years for some of this stuff to clear.
Potentially. It really underscores why we see these long-term effects on DLCO. The dust isn't just passing through. Some of it gets lodged deep down and stays there for a very long time, causing ongoing issues.
That's sobering. So piecing this all together, the immediate symptoms, the objective lung function decline, especially that persistent DLCO drop. What's the bottom line for these rescue workers?
The bottom line is that their incredible dedication, their heroism, often comes with a hidden long-term health cost, an invisible scar on their lungs. It's not just temporary discomfort, it's measurable, lasting physiological damage that can impact their health and quality of life for potentially years down the road, and something we absolutely need to acknowledge and address.
Definitely. And to really understand how to address it, we need to understand the enemy, so to speak, that toxic dust.
Yeah.
What exactly were they breathing?
Yeah, the air quality analysis from Kahramanmaraş is quite revealing. PM 2.5 levels, those are the really fine, dangerous particles, rose significantly days after the quake. They exceeded 70 micrograms per cubic meter. That's very high.
And where was it all coming from?
Primarily from the incredible amount of debris. Estimates range from 116 to 210 million tons. And it's not just inert building material. It's fine cement dust, yes, but also potentially harmful pollutants from pulverized paints, pipes, insulation, flooring materials, a real complex mix.
How does that compare to other major quakes?
Well, just as one point of comparison, after Japan's Great Hanshin earthquake in 1995, the reported dust concentrations, while still high, were generally lower, maybe around 150 micrograms per cubic meter for total particulate matter. The data suggests the exposure intensity and perhaps the duration in Kahramanmaraş might have been particularly severe.
Okay, so extreme conditions. Facing this incredibly hazardous dust, how effective were the protective measures? Were these workers adequately equipped?
This is, frankly, one of the most concerning parts of the study's findings. There's a stark contrast with some previous events. Remember that Taiwan earthquake study? Nearly everyone, 98%, reported using some kind of respiratory protection, and a huge majority, 83%, used effective masks like N95s or P100s.
And in Kahramanmaraş?
It was much, much lower. Only about 48% used even a basic surgical mask, and only about a third, roughly 28.6%, used an N95 or an equivalent high filtration mask.
Less than a third. using N95s in that environment. That's
It
alarming.
is very alarming.
Now, it's easy to just say, well, people should have worn their masks. But in the middle of that kind of chaos, with maybe thousands of spontaneous volunteers rushing in, how realistic is perfect PPE adherence? What reasons did the study suggest for this low usage?
That's a really important nuance. It wasn't just individuals choosing not to wear masks. The study points to broader systemic issues, things like actual deficiencies in providing enough protective gear in the first place. The sheer vastness of the disaster zone making distribution incredibly difficult. Also, the large number of spontaneous volunteers who might not have had training or equipment, and maybe even some professional teams being caught unprepared for the scale of respiratory protection needed. It's complex.
So it's a systemic challenge, not just individual failings. That makes sense in such an overwhelming situation.
Okay, given all of this, the severe exposure, the lasting health impacts, the protection gaps, what are the critical, actionable lessons we need to take away from this for future disasters? All right, let's try to summarize the key takeaways from our deep dive today. This research paints a pretty clear picture, doesn't it? We're seeing significant immediate negative impacts on respiratory health for these search and rescue workers, but maybe more importantly, persistent long-term effects, particularly shown by that drop in DLCO, because of the earthquake dust. It really highlights how crucial these objective tests are for tracking the invisible toll long after the dust settles physically.
Absolutely. From a clinical standpoint, these findings are unambiguous. They show a clear, measurable deterioration in respiratory health linked directly to their occupational exposure in the disaster zone. It really frames this as an occupational health crisis nested within a humanitarian one. We have a duty of care to these responders. And the study doesn't just identify the problem, it offers solutions, right? What were the main recommendations for improving protection?
Yes, it provides clear guidance. It boils down to ensuring appropriate personal protective equipment, like those N95 masks, is not just available, but readily accessible and consistently used. This requires continuous training on how to use it correctly. And importantly, implementing dust suppression methods proactively, things like wetting down debris piles during rescue operations and especially during later demolition work.
Simple measures, in theory, but potentially life-saving or at least health-preserving in practice. So that brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners, to consider. We've talked about these often invisible long-term threats faced by disaster responders. How might we as a society truly step up? How can we better equip and support these heroes, not just with applause in the moment, but with concrete measures for their long-term well-being and continued health? How do we make sure their bravery doesn't come at the enduring cost of their very breath?